Hello, I'm Perron, called the first receiver of A Course of Love. I'm called that because Jesus actually calls me that within the Course. All of us actually receive A Course of Love. The Course of Love is Jesus speaking to each one of us, and each of us listening and taking in what is appealing to our own hearts. So I'm here today because it's February of 2019. The Course has been in existence or it started to be received 20 years ago. It was first published in 2001, and it's only in recent years begun to be widely read and to be translated into different languages. And so it felt like time for me to talk about what A Course of Love has meant to me, what I feel is its major thrust, and to invite you to just be aware of the feelings that I had about it as I received it, which may not be yours. There's no right way, but this might help you to begin or to continue your reception of A Course of Love with the perspective of the years that I have with it. And actually, one of the ways that I want to talk about this, and it may end up being that I will do a video on each book of the Course that talks to the same theme, which is the theme of our identity. Because what I always say, which is sort of shorthand for the whole of the Course, is that A Course of Love is about being who you are. And I don't think there's a one of us on the planet who don't feel that yearning and desire to be who we truly are. And maybe there's a few people who don't think of it that way, who think about wanting to be somebody other than who they are, which is really sort of what's defined in this Course and in A Course in Miracles as the work of the ego. The ego is what makes us want to be other than who we are. Who we are is a gift of God. We were each created unique and yet indivisible from God. Our humanity and our life on this world does not make us separate. And that is one of the key themes of A Course of Love that I want to share with you. And it might seem different than what you've heard before. And if you can just let that be okay for now, we'll just keep heading in that direction of maybe letting you see why our identity and our inseparability from God are joined together. But I want to start with identity because that's the way A Course of Love starts. And it links so well with my own feeling that A Course of Love is about being who we are. Because what Jesus says, what he said to me, what he says to you, the way the Course begins is with him talking about us being in an identity crisis. And I really feel it's very relatable to talk about what has happened to us in our humanity, in our growth into who we are, in the time that we're living in the culture that we're living in, with the education that we've had, with the parents that we've had, with our, struggles, our adversities, and all these things, we have picked up an identity crisis. So we're going to talk about the end of that identity crisis in A Course of Love. And I'm going to begin by reading you from the Prelude. So the Prelude is the first words that I heard when Jesus came into my mind. And when I say that, what I'm saying is that I was, after having been prepared for A Course of Love, and I've done many videos that talk about that, which you can find on my Perron YouTube channel. So I'm not going to go into that today. I'm going to talk more specifically about the book. But I do want you to understand what I mean when I said Jesus came into my mind. So after this preparation, in which I knew something was coming, but I didn't know exactly what, I sat down at my computer one day and I heard the opening words of this course in my mind. And when you pick up your book and read from it, and you read, this is A Course in Miracles, it is a required course. You're going to be hearing those words in your mind like you hear your thoughts. And that's the way that I heard these thoughts. And Jesus himself also said within the course that I hear these as thoughts I'm not thinking. And really, in many ways, it's a description of reading. If we are really intent or engrossed, we are hearing thoughts we are not thinking. So that takes it a little bit down from the strangeness that it might seem to be. And it's not that this wasn't miraculous. It's not that I didn't feel it was a holy experience. But it is also not something that needs to create any difference between us, because we all have this capacity, and it might not be in the same way. You may hear in beautiful music, you might be an artist, you might be a scientist. We all have our unique way of knowing, and this one happens to be mine. So I'm going to read, like I said, to you from this opening of A Course of Love and kind of follow what Jesus talks about when he's talking about our identity. And like I say, I may do that with the other two courses. I will do videos on each I'm sorry, I said each of the courses. What I meant was I'm talking about the 3 books that make up this combined volume of A Course of Love, which you can see is well used. So I'm talking about the course, the treatises, and the dialogues. Now, A Course of Love is one book straight through. It has 32 chapters, and that's what we'll be talking about today. When we get to the treatises, there are 4 of them, and the dialogues have 2 sections, one that's chapters and one that's an experience on the mountaintop. So those we might go through a little bit differently. But for today, we're talking about Book 1, A Course of Love, with the main theme of identity. So I'm going to read from the beginning. This is a course of love. It is a required course. The time for you to take it is now. You are ready, and miracles are needed. Pray for all those in need of miracles. To pray is to ask. But for what are you asking? This is the first instruction in this Course in Miracles. All are in need of miracles. This is the first step in miracle readiness, asking for all to be included in what we do here. By praying for all those in need of miracles, you are praying for all to learn as you learn. You are asking to link your mind to all minds. You are asking to end your separated state and to learn in a state of unity. This is a basic recognition that this is the only way you learn. The separated self or the ego does not learn. So that's the end of reading just for the moment. We've heard that we're going to end this identity crisis, and we're going to be taught how to do this, but Jesus can't teach to our ego. And so we continue with learning our true identity, the identity of the self that is capable of learning is something everyone must do. Can the ego learn this? Never. Does spirit need to? No. Who then is this course for? This is a basic question that was not adequately answered in A Course in Miracles. While A Course in Miracles is meaningless to the ego and unnecessary to spirit, it would seem to have no audience at all if these are the only 2 states that exist. Since it is impossible to be part spirit and part ego, assuming that there would be such a state in which learning could take place would be meaningless. the world as a state of being, the world as a state of being, as a whole, has entered a time brought on largely by A Course in Miracles, in rich readiness for miracle-mindedness is upon it. So what is it in us that is capable of learning? What is it in you, Jesus asks, that recognizes that the ego is not what you are? What is it in you that recognizes your spirit? What is it in you that hovers between two worlds, the world of the ego's dominion and that of spirit? What recognizes the difference? The Christ in you. The Christ in you is that which is capable of learning in human form what it means to be a child of God. So I'm going to break from reading to talk about just a little bit my understanding of the Christ in us, and we'll hear more about that. But I'm from the Christian tradition, and so this may be easier for me than it is for some from other traditions. But really, every tradition talks about oneness. And in the Christian tradition, we talk about the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that they're all one. And the Christ in us is that same oneness with the whole. So what we're talking about really, and it doesn't matter what tradition you come from in the sense of wholeness, we are talking about being one with our source, being one with creation, and being one here in our humanity as Jesus was. So just a little aside on that. So a few paragraphs after what I just read, Jesus talks about awakening to a new world. You are here not to awaken to the same world, a world that seems a little more sane than before, but still governed by insanity, a world in which it seems possible to help a few others, but certainly not all others, but to awaken to a new world. If all that you see changed within your world is a little less insanity than before, then you have not awakened, but still are caught in the nightmare your ego has made. By choosing to reject yourself, you have chosen to try to make sense of the nightmare rather than to waken from it. So this begins our adventure in love, our adventure in heading to a real world, a world populated by people who are in union and relationship with each other, a world that we recognize as real, a world that we know that we are connected with, that we feel awe about, that we can commune with. And this is not all expressed in this way in this first book, but I want you to be aware that this is where we're heading. This isn't a rehash of thinking about the ego and how the ego sees the world, because that's what the illusion is. The illusion is how the ego sees the world. The ego is the rejection of ourselves. And we are here. We are in this course of love to accept ourselves, to accept Jesus's invitation, each other's invitation, our longing and desire for us to be relating in this world as true selves, as genuine people, as authentic persons, as depth, as, from the depth of our souls. If you would think of ego as just, this little piece of us, this little part of our brain that began to be formed as we grew under the guidance of those we were in relationship, to believe the world to be this place of fear and to believe ourselves to be separate. Of course, we developed something that would protect us and that would shield us from all those fears that we were taught to have, really. So this is not a failing. This has happened to everyone, but it does not have to be how we live our lives.
So we're going to leave the prelude now, which is where we started, the prelude of A Course of Love. And I'm going to just share a little bit with you from a couple of the chapters that speak of love so that we have a better definition of what we're talking about when we talk about love. And then we'll go from there, okay? So this is from the first chapter. So we went from the prelude to the first chapter. Every living being has a heart. Let us define heart as the center of your being, that place from which all feeling arises. All true feeling is love. All love praises God. All love is recognition of the glory of God and all God created. Love is the only pure response of the created to the Creator, the only response of the Creator to the created. Your recognition of what love is will return you to God and yourself. Love is the condition of your reality. From chapter 2, what love is cannot be taught. It cannot be learned, but it can be recognized. Isn't that a beautiful word? Recognition? We hear a lot about both recognition and remembrance in this course, because basically we have forgotten. We have forgotten who we are here to be. We have forgotten what was planted in us, what the love that's in us from our birth, and the unique givens that we each have to bring the world. And all of this can be remembered. And it's really a way of knowing. And so this is one of the reasons that learning does not continue in this course. Because when we begin to return to who we are, it's a way of knowing that's a little bit different. It's not something that can be taken in from outside ourselves. Nobody can give us the right answer about who we are. Nobody can tell us what love is. So we use these words, we try to make suggestions of who we are, who we can be, what love is, what love can look like in the world. But what we're really doing is beginning to recognize and remember the love that we are. Now, when we get to chapter 20, which is where I'm going to take you next, I had had quite an experience before that. I had been paused in the receiving, and I was paused after a chapter called Oneness and Duality. And one of the phrases within that is, out of the deepest, darkest chaos of your mind comes the possibility of light. So after being paused for about 2 months, I come back to A Course of Love. I begin to be able to hear it again. That's what I mean by being paused. I could not, for a while, hear the words when I would go to my computer as I had before. And I heard in my mind, instead of the next words of the Course, you can't go on with your thinking mind. So what we are making a move to, what is going to bring us to this new way of knowing, is letting go of that thinking mind, that mind that we've associated with the ego, the mind that wants to know correct answers, the mind that wants to know information, the mind that thinks that we can go out to get even this information about love, that thinks knowing about love is information when it's, of course, not. So we are moving into a deep feeling zone. And I'm going to read you one little quote from this beautiful chapter 20 called The Embrace. And it's not the opening one that I usually read, but one that talks about this beginning to the change in our identity. The heartbeat of the world does not exist apart from God. The heartbeat of the world is thus alive and part of you. This heart connection is what we seek to return you to. This realization that the world is not a thing and you are not a thing. Your identity is shared and one in Christ. Your identity is shared and one in Christ. Now, in the in the Christian tradition, I don't think that Jesus actually talks about the Trinity in A Course of Love more than once, but I just bring that up because I believe that all of us know of some form of this oneness that is also separation, such as the form of the Trinity. So there is a distinction. There is the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They are distinct, but they are also in union. And so this is what we are heading toward, this way of seeing ourselves in union. We are in union and distinct. So this new identity is kind of tied to this realization. And also in that chapter I just left, the chapter on the embrace, Jesus talks about us no longer seeing through the eye of the ego. So this is all coming together. And so now I'm skipping to chapter 23 that talks a little bit about the process. So we've had a certain process of learning all our lives where we take in this subject matter, okay? And so this is just a little paragraph on that. In the past, exercises have most often begun with an alteration of beliefs regarding form. Here, we have taken an opposite approach, beginning with exercises to alter your belief in your identity and concluding with exercises that alter your belief in form. This is consistent with our primary focus on learning from the heart. The mind goes from the small to the large, the heart from the large to the small, and only the wholehearted see the connection of all. So this is the movement that we're taking from being single-minded, from not giving a lot of regard to the heart, to being wholehearted. And this is an enormous benefit to us because really, it's a division between us when we think with our mind and feel with our heart, when our heart is often contradicted by our mind, when we haven't been taught to value the heart's way of knowing, which includes imagination, intuition. Our creativity really stems from these deep feelings of the heart. And so we're making this move not to keep them separate. We're not going all heart now. We're going to be a heart and mind united in wholeheartedness. So that our new way of knowing, in this new identity we're coming to, is a way of wholeheartedness. And so it's a new way of knowing, all right? So keep that in mind. Because we're skipping now to chapter 27. When you fully realize that the only way to know the self is through relationship, your concerns and concentration on the self will end. Life is not a matter of self versus other. Life is a matter of relationship. Life is not a matter of human versus divine, but a matter of relationship between human and divine. Life is not a matter of one living thing versus another, but of the relationship between all living things. Thus, your relationship with Christ always was and always will be. Your task here is to come to know that relationship once again. The thought of God by which you were created is synonymous with the Christ in you. It is your relationship with your source and all that was created. Can you begin to visualize or perceive your true identity as relationship itself? And what of God? Can you unlearn all concepts and free your mind to accept all relationship instead? Now, just a little bit on chapter 29. And I love these parts that talk about our humanity, because this is, for some of us, what we're returning to. If we've been on long spiritual journeys or followed certain paths, we may have discounted our humanity quite a bit. And A Course of Love allows us, encourages us to bring who we are in our humanity and our divinity back into the picture. And this is the way that we begin to come to know, to learn, as is still said in this first part of the course, but begins to be said less and less, because love can't be taught. So right now, we're still a little bit in this learning zone, but we're coming into love, and we've joined mind and heart, and that's the beginning of the ego falling away. But this part talks about talent. How can one's talent cause another to be less talented? How can one's service deprive another of the right to serve? No two are alike. Your gifts, your talents, your uniqueness are your service. Can you not look at them thus? And can you not come to understand the reciprocal nature of your giftedness? That what God has given only needs to be received, that what you have received only needs to be given. The indivisibleness of God is simply this, an unbroken chain of giving and receiving. This is a definition of unity as well. And now I'm going to end with just a little bit on my favorite chapter, chapter 31, and I don't even think I'll pick it up to quote it. Maybe I will. We'll see how my memory works today. But this chapter is about sharing, and my whole spiritual journey began with an extremely warm and particular and miraculous time of sharing with two women with whom I worked. I was in my 40s then. This was just before A Course of Love came. And the two women I worked with had gotten pregnant within days of each other. And my friend and creative partner of many years, Mary Love, lost her baby daughter, Grace, when she was 5 weeks old. And she and Julianne Carver, who was the other pregnant woman, had been so close in their pregnancies. And in that time just after, when Mary was grieving and Julie felt so much for her, they began to have things occur that were outside of the boundaries of what we normally expect to occur. They might have been seen as small things and discounted, except we were together 5 days a week. And they began to share and find these similarities. And this, it's like when spirit begins to come to you, it can seem very ordinary, like you can just discount it because it just seems like a little thing. But sometimes, and this is particularly true, when two people are sharing a way of knowing that you can talk about, you begin to realize that knowing really is shared. And so this sort of loving relationship that I was in with these women had really affected me. And I knew that the kind of sharing I had with them was what I wanted. I wanted to know and be known. And I believe that's what we all want. That's the joy. That's the energy. That's where creativity comes from. Everything comes from that place that is a way of knowing and being known. Sometimes people can feel it in many different ways. You know, it's like I feel it sometimes out in nature or with my camera. Like there's something that happens between me and that view. In fact, I'm just going to turn the computer. Let's see if I can show you. Maybe not. Can you see the snow? The lovely snow outside my window? And my cabin back there. So I have really embraced a way of a lot of contemplation and solitude since A Course of Love. And I commune with nature a lot. And there's a sense of knowing and being known with that too. And there's certainly that with the divine. And so what is my favorite quote, which comes from chapter 31, is about how you have to share who you are to be who you are. And so if we are not sharing our truest self, if we still have that uncomfortableness, that insecurity, that fear of being ourselves. I mean, I had that. I had not had, you know, I don't even know how to say it. I had not lived the greatest, most proper life. I had been a single parent. I had had all kinds of things that I thought were catastrophes happen to me. I had made poor choices. I had erred. I had so many things I didn't want people to know. And once I could begin to share, of course, we all feel this way, you know, and if I kind of joke sometimes that if someone has had a perfect life and they're always fine, I don't really want to know them. And that might be a little bit much for my first video, but um, it is in the wholeness of our lives, of our experience, of our character and what built our character and our ethics. I mean, what is important to us, what our heart knows is important in this life, the choices we make to follow our hearts, the choices we make that don't follow our hearts. These are what create this incredible essence of who we are in human form, and the way that we can share this and relate both to our Creator and to each other in love. And this becomes our new way of knowing in this relatedness. So I would hope that I have given you a little taste of this first book of A Course of Love, and that you might care to return to hear a little bit about how we move beyond these beginning steps of accepting that who we are is love and that we can share who we are, into what comes later, to an ending that's about being in dialogue and creating the new. This is an essential and important, a crucial time for this to be happening, for us to be, as Jesus will call us later in the books, pioneers and pilgrims of the new, for us to be part of creating unity instead of separation and love instead of fear. I'm Mari Perron, from my heart and A Course of Love. Thank you for being with me.